and that emanates out of the poles as well. And so as this object is spinning extremely fast, you get a beam of radiation that's beaming off out into space. As it spins, if that beam of radiation points in the direction of the Earth, then we get a pulse, which is why this is called a pulsar or pulsating star. This particular one at the center of the Crab Nebula pulses 33 times every single second. It's called a millisecond pulsar. Jocelyn Bell discovered it in the 1960s. In 1974, her supervisor, a physicist by the name of Anthony Hewish, won the Nobel Prize for Physics for her discovery and got the equivalent of $1 million at the time. Unfortunately, Jocelyn Bell didn't get anything at all. Typical in science. Okay, so there we have the Crab Nebula. If we then move away from Orion and the Taurus, we'll come to the dogs. Here's Canis Major, the large dog. It does look a bit like a dog in the sky. In fact, you can mark out the shape of a head of a dog. There's the front legs of the dog here. There's the tail, and then the back legs. It does contain the brightest star in the nighttime sky. That star is called Sirius, and that is Greek for scorching. It's the brightest star in our nighttime sky. So there we have the faithful dog of Orion, Canis Major. It is a rich region of the sky. You can pick out lots of different clusters of stars and things like that. For instance, there's M41, which we'll highlight on the next slide. If it's not in Charles Messier's catalogue of deep sky objects, there was a later catalogue created called the NGC catalogue. That stands for the New General Catalogue. And you can see those objects designated just with numbers. So, for instance, 2384 stands for NGC 2384. It's a much bigger catalogue of deep sky objects. As telescopes got bigger and bigger, they were able to pick out more and more of these objects in the nighttime sky. And this region is definitely rich with that stuff. Here's a few photographs showing you some of these objects. There is Sirius. It's sometimes called the Dog Star because it's in the constellation of the dog. It's a wide-angle view of it. Here's a couple of open clusters of stars. There's M41 here, and then the one at the bottom here is NGC 2362. The actual star itself, Sirius, is a double star. The main star that you can see in the nighttime sky is actually designated Sirius A. It's the brightest star in the sky. Its magnitude is minus 1.45. It's quite close to us. It's about 8.6 light years away. And if you do the math on it, you'll find out that it's about 26 times the power of the Sun. Usually designate the Sun with a circle and a dot around it, like that, because that's the one star in the sky that we orbit around. So it's much more powerful than the Sun, about 26 times the power of the Sun. It does have a companion star, which you can see down here, and that star is called Sirius B. So if you have multiple star systems, and a lot of stars are multiple stars, they label them with capital letters, A, B, C, D, so on and so forth. It's much smaller and not anywhere near as powerful as Sirius A. In fact, it's actually smaller than the Earth. It's a particular kind of star known as a white dwarf. These are extremely dense objects. Like this white dwarf star is about 92,000 times the density of the Sun. So it's a star that's about the size of the Earth, typically very hot, surface temperature of about 25,000 degrees or so. Extremely hot objects. One day the Sun will actually look like a white dwarf. That's what happens when you end up with a low mass star coming to the end of its life. High mass stars, they blow up with massive explosions, which we call supernova. Low mass stars like the Sun fade away when they come to the end of their lives. A much quieter death than what a supernova would produce. Okay, then above Canis Major you've got the small constellation of Canis Minor, the small dog. The bright star Procyon, it's one of the brightest stars in the nighttime sky. It's in the top 10. The word literally means preceding the dog. That's what Procyon means. Now the reason why it's called that is because it's much higher up in the sky, and that means then that when you're watching towards the east and you see the stars coming up, Procyon actually arises before Sirius does, so it literally does precede the dog. Okay, so that's Canis Major and Canis Minor. Then if you look above Orion, you can see the constellations of Gemini, the twins, supposed to represent the twin sons of Leda, and Auriga, the charioteer. Going to highlight a couple of items. There's this bright star Castor. It looks in our nighttime sky as only one star, but it's actually 6 separate stars orbiting around one another. And then this other star is Pollux. The constellation looks a bit like matchstick men holding hands in the sky. Not too difficult to work out, and imagine that they look like twins. I'm going to highlight an object. It's just off the edge here. It's called the Eskimo Nebula. And you can see many clusters of stars in this region of the sky. This one's called M35, M37, M36, all very, very close together, and M38, very rich regions of the sky. The brightest star in Auriga is called Capella. Capella means she-goat. It's a bit confusing. You've got a goat riding a chariot across the sky, so the mythology there's a bit confusing. Capella is minding 3 baby goats. Those 3 stars together in that little triangle are collectively called the kids, or baby goats. So you've got a she-goat and baby goats riding a chariot across the sky. That's pretty interesting mythology there. Okay, let's have a look at the actual map itself of Auriga. You can see Capella there. It's one of the top 10 brightest stars in the sky. It's quite close by. It's only about 42 light years away from us. And it's rich in open clusters because of the way the band of the Milky Way goes through that region of the sky. Constellation of Capella. On the very next slide then you can actually see these items. I've highlighted them all. Here's M35, open cluster of stars, quite close, only 2,800 light years away. There's a much further cluster here, NGC 2158. It's an open cluster as well, but it's about 11,000 light years away, so it appears much more compact. Then M36, M37, and M38, which you can see there. It's quite common for stars to be formed in clusters. In fact, there's essentially 3 different groupings of stars that you can get. You can get what are known as globular clusters. These are very compact groups of stars, typically 100,000 stars inside them. They're held together by their gravity, and they can last for billions of years. Then you can get open clusters. These typically have a few hundred stars in them. They last for millions of years as a cluster, but there's not as many stars, so the gravity's not as strong, and eventually they break up. But they can certainly last for millions of years. And then the smallest grouping are known as an association, which are a bit like a few dozen stars, maybe 10 stars or so. These are the weakest gravitationally bound clusters because they don't have many stars. The Sun, if it had any companions in the past, probably formed from an association because we can't see any of those stars around. They tend to go their separate ways. A bit like a dog having a litter of puppies, and then each one of the puppies is farmed out and they'll never see each other again. So there are different clusters that you can get. On the top left here, though, that's a pretty and spectacular looking image of the Eskimo Nebula. In fact, if it was labelled today, maybe it would be called something like the Kenny Nebula or something like that, if you follow South Park. Now this is a very compact object. It is what a star looks like, a low mass star, when it comes to the end of its life. There's the white dwarf star that you can see in the centre, the remnants of the core of the star left behind, and the outer layers of the star are puffed off out into space. And maybe one day the Sun will look something similar to this. This is known as a planetary nebula. And that's typically what low mass stars look like when they shed their outer layers at the end of their lives. That's a good example of a planetary nebula, the Eskimo. Okay, then the final constellation that we'll talk about in the winter sky is the constellation of Cancer, the Crab. It's one of the faintest constellations of the zodiac. It was supposed to have been stood on by Hercules, if you look at the mythology associated with it. And the brightest star is actually only magnitude 3.5. Most of the stars are magnitude 5 or 6, so it's not easy to pick out in the nighttime sky. The two main stars are called Asellus Borealis and Asellus Australis, the northern ass and the southern ass. So these are asses, wild donkeys, that helped defeat the Titans. If you look up your mythology, and they were rewarded by being put up in the nighttime sky, they appear to be feeding on a manger. Which is what this group of stars is supposed to represent. So these animals are eating this feeding trough. The word hive or major in Latin is called praesepe. It can mean hive or it can mean major. And M44, as it's labelled, is called the beehive cluster. It's a faint group of stars. You can actually see it with the naked eye, about 200 stars or so. It's possible to pick out from a very, very dark location. So that's the very, very faint constellation of Cancer. And that sums up the constellations and stuff that you can see easily in the winter sky.